Hey guys, welcome back to another long, sleepy dive into the foggy corners of history, where things explode, freeze, and occasionally fall asleep in a snowdrift. Tonight, we're stepping into the worn out boots of a German soldier, not during the glorious marches or grand speeches, but at the end, when the snow was knee deep, the bread was hard enough to qualify as a weapon, and everyone had the same thought: how much further till home? This isn't a story of battles. It's the story of after, of frost, laughter, and the strange human instinct to joke while everything falls apart. So, get comfortable, dim the lights, and imagine the creak of frozen boots, the whisper of snow against a metal helmet, and the slow, weary heartbeat of a soldier who's just trying to get home. He didn't remember when the road stopped being a road. At some point, it had simply become a direction. West. West meant home, or at least the idea of it. Behind him was the East, and everything terrible that word now meant. The man's name was Ernst Müller, though everyone called him Mully. He wasn't sure why, maybe because nicknames made the cold a little less serious. His coat had once been gray. Now, it was mostly brown, white, and despair colored. The buttons were gone, replaced with bits of wire and a lucky nail. He'd found the nail 3 villages ago and decided it had heroic potential. He wasn't alone. There were others, thin silhouettes trudging through the white, each man reduced to the same rhythm: step, breathe, shiver. Their breath hung in the air, like ghosts too tired to leave. Remember when they said it would be over by Christmas? Someone muttered. Ernst laughed, or something close to it. His breath wheezed like an old accordion. Yes, he said. They didn't say which Christmas. Somewhere ahead, a horse neighed, one of the last still standing. They all turned for a moment, not to look at the animal, but because the sound reminded them that something alive still existed. The villages they passed were half buried under snow, roofs sagging under the weight of the world. Windows stared back at them, dark, empty, like eyes that had seen too much. Occasionally, a door would open and a face would peek out, frightened, cautious, and quickly gone again. The snow made everything quiet, except the crunch of boots and the occasional clatter of a dropped rifle. Ernst carried no illusions. He wasn't retreating to victory. He was escaping a memory, the kind that would sit behind your eyes forever, whispering at night. Still, he tried to keep his humor alive. When his boots froze, he called it extra armor. When the bread ran out, he said he was on the Arctic diet, guaranteed results. The others laughed because laughter was easier than despair. By nightfall, they reached the remains of a farmhouse. The roof had collapsed, but there was enough left to block the wind. Inside, they made a small fire, the kind that gives more hope than heat. Someone shared a story about home, about a wife, a child, a dog that probably forgot him. Ernst didn't speak. He just watched the firelight flicker on their hollow faces. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and history alike. Ernst thought about the road, how it always stretched west, never ending, never promising anything. And as he lay down on the cold floor, he whispered the same prayer he'd said every night for weeks now. Just one more day, God. I'll be funnier tomorrow. The others laughed softly, and for a moment, under that broken roof, it almost felt like peace. Morning arrived without sunlight. The sky was just a gray sheet of exhaustion, hanging over everything like an old army blanket someone forgot to wash. Ernst Müller woke up feeling older than he was, a side effect of sleeping on frozen dirt and bad memories. His breath made small clouds above his face, like smoke signals sent to no one in particular. He sat up slowly, his joints protesting like rusty hinges. Around him, the other soldiers stirred, coughing, groaning, muttering to themselves. The orchestra of men who run out of victories, but still had plenty of blisters. Someone asked if today was Sunday. Someone else said it didn't matter anymore. God stopped keeping track. Ernst smiled faintly. Then I guess we're all early for Judgment Day. Outside, the snow had hardened overnight. It crunched like glass beneath their boots. Every step was a small argument with gravity. The road, if it could still be called that, was littered with frozen wagon wheels, shattered helmets, and the occasional boot that no one had claimed. The landscape was a museum of mistakes, curated by the weather. They marched in silence for a while. Words felt too heavy to carry. Ernst found himself remembering home again. Not in detail, just flashes. His mother's kitchen, the smell of bread, the warmth of something as simple as sitting near a fire without hearing artillery in the distance. But memory was dangerous. It could make you careless, and careless men froze faster. At midday, they stopped at a half-frozen river. The bridge had collapsed, either bombed or simply tired of existing. The only way across was a thin crust of ice that did T look particularly committed to the job. A corporal tested it with his rifle butt. Crack. Everyone stared. Looks fine, he said. No one believed him. But belief was optional these days. One by one, they crossed. The ice groaned under their weight, muttering complaints in a language only rivers understand. Ernst went last, staring at the black water beneath the cracks, a cold so deep it looked eternal. Halfway across, his boot slipped. A quick gasp, a flail, and then, somehow, balance returned. He stood there for a long moment, heart hammering like distant artillery, before shuffling on. When he reached the other side, someone clapped slowly. Bravo, Müller. You dance well. He gave a tired grin. Ice ballet. Limited engagement. The others laughed. It wasn't much, but it was something human in a place that had forgotten laughter. They moved on. By dusk, they found an abandoned village, the kind that looked like it had been left mid-sentence. Doors hung open, chairs lay overturned. A child's doll stared up from the snow, one eye missing. They entered a house that still had a roof. Inside, it smelled of smoke, wood, and silence. On a table, someone had left a loaf of bread, so stale it could have been used as building material. Ernst picked it up. Still softer than mine, he said. That night, they built another small fire and shared the bread, cutting it with a bayonet that was sharper than the conversation. One man asked what would happen when they reached Germany. Another shrugged. If it's still there? Ernst didn't answer. He looked into the fire and thought about the word home. It didn't feel real anymore. Just a rumor that people told to keep walking. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in forgetfulness. Inside, a few men snored, a few whispered, and Ernst stared at the flames, thinking how strange it was that warmth always felt temporary. He smiled faintly before sleep claimed him. At least, he whispered, no one asked for my papers today. The fire crackled softly, its own small rebellion against the cold. By morning, the snow had stopped. The air was still, as if the world had finally decided to take a break from collapsing. Ernst Müller woke to silence. Not the usual kind, not the heavy, cold quiet of winter, but something deeper, the kind of silence that feels like a question, waiting for an answer. He stepped outside the ruined farmhouse, blinking at the pale light. The village stretched before him, a dozen houses, one small church, and a main road buried under a clean, white blanket. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. No movement, no sound, no smoke, just stillness, frozen in time. A few men followed him out, stamping their boots, their breath forming lazy clouds in the air. One of them pointed toward a window where a lace curtain fluttered slightly. Someone's there? No, said Ernst softly. Just the wind pretending. They walked down the main street, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. No one expected trouble anymore, only ghosts. A dog barked once in the distance. They froze. Then, nothing. Even the echo seemed to vanish into the snow. At the edge of the village, they found a well. The rope was frozen stiff, the bucket encased in ice. Ernst chipped at it with his bayonet, muttering about how even the water had surrendered. Don't bother, someone said. I'd rather stay thirsty than lick another icicle. Suit yourself, Ernst replied. I'm an optimist. The others laughed, quietly, because laughter carried strangely in empty places. They split up to search the houses. Most were empty, but not empty in a normal way. It was the kind of emptiness that felt recent. Chairs still pushed back from tables, cups on shelves, even a half-finished knitting project on a couch. Whoever had lived here had left quickly, or simply vanished. In one home, Ernst found a child's shoe beside the fireplace. He stared at it for a moment, then placed it neatly on the mantel, as if that act restored some kind of order. In another, he found a calendar still hanging on the wall. The last date marked was months ago, circled in pencil. The word hope was scribbled beside it. He didn't know what language it was in, didn't need to. When they regrouped, no one spoke for a long time. The silence of the village seemed to press against them, whispering things that didn't need translating. Finally, one man said, maybe they just left. You know, before the front. Ernst nodded. Maybe. But he didn't believe it. The men built another small fire near the church, the only building still standing straight. Ernst sat beside it, rubbing his hands, watching smoke rise into the gray sky. I used to think war was loud, he said softly. Turns out it's mostly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you miss the noise. Someone chuckled. Don't worry. I'm sure the noise will find us soon enough. That's what I'm afraid of. Later, as night fell, they decided to stay one more night in the village. It felt strange, sleeping in someone else's home, surrounded by invisible memories. Ernst took the house with the calendar. Before sleeping, he looked once more at that circled date. He thought about hope, how it wasn't something you had, but something you borrowed from tomorrow. He lay down on the cold floor, wrapped in his blanket, and whispered, tomorrow, I'll find a village that breathes. But the snow outside fell thicker, quieter, as if the world had already decided to stay asleep. They left the village at dawn, or what passed for dawn, a dim gray light that seemed to rise reluctantly, like even the sun had given up on trying. Ernst led the group west, or at least what he hoped was west. His compass had frozen 2 days ago, and now pointed mostly to somewhere. He kept it anyway, a small circle of brass and false confidence. Still says west, he'd mutter, tapping it with a gloved finger. One of the men grinned. That's funny. My stomach says east, to where we left the potatoes. Then you lead, Ernst said. We'll follow your hunger. The laughter that followed was quiet, but real, a small miracle in the cold. They trudged on through an endless landscape of white and gray. The world felt like an old photograph, bleached of color, stuck between yesterday and never. Every so often, they passed the remnants of others. A broken sled, an empty ammunition box, a helmet half buried in ice, silent markers of men who'd walked the same path and lost to the same winter. At midday, the snow began again, slow, steady, indifferent. It didn't fall so much as arrive, drifting from nowhere and everywhere at once. One soldier stopped and looked around. Does anyone actually know where we're going? Ernst shrugged. Away from the east. That's not a direction. It's the only one that matters. They pressed on, half laughing, half freezing. By afternoon, their road disappeared entirely. The compass needle twitched, then gave up entirely, spinning lazily as if mocking them. Ernst stared at it for a moment, then tucked it back into his pocket. Gentlemen, he said, the compass has decided to retire. We'll proceed by intuition and bad decisions. Ah, one man said, the traditional German strategy. They all laughed again, weary but grateful for the sound of something human. Hunger gnawed at them by nightfall. The last rations were gone, except for a single tin of something unidentifiable. The label had peeled off long ago, so it was anyone's guess whether it was beans, meat, or experimental glue. They passed it around like a sacred relic. Ernst opened it with his bayonet, sniffed cautiously, and said, It's edible. Probably. They took turns eating, each man wincing, but pretending it was delicious. When the tin was empty, Ernst licked the spoon and said, 5-star cuisine. I'll send my compliments to the chef. Who? Someone asked. He gestured vaguely toward the gray horizon. God, I suppose. He's the one still cooking up surprises. That night, they found a small patch of forest, trees so thin and twisted they looked like bones sticking out of the ground. They built a fire, a weak one that smoked more than it burned, but it was enough. As they huddled close, Ernst pulled out the broken compass again. The needle wobbled once, then pointed firmly north, the wrong direction entirely. He smiled faintly. At least it's confident. One of the men leaned back, eyes half closed. Maybe it's trying to tell us something. Yes, Ernst said, that we're lost. But politely. The men chuckled softly, then grew quiet again. The fire flickered low. Snowflakes drifted down like ash from an invisible sky. Ernst lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, watching his breath rise and vanish. He thought about how strange it was that a man could know exactly where he wanted to go and still have no idea how to get there. He closed his eyes finally, murmuring, West, East, North, doesn't matter, just home. The compass in his pocket twitched once more, as if it understood, or at least pretended to. The next morning began with music, not the kind anyone expected, not a marching band, not a bugle, not even the occasional cursed humming of a bored soldier, but something softer, strange, and oddly cheerful, an accordion. It floated across the snow, like a sound that had taken a wrong turn somewhere around 1941 and was still trying to find its audience. Ernst opened one eye. The other stirred, frowning, listening. You hear that? Someone muttered. If I didn't, I'd be worried, Ernst said. I was starting to think we'd gone deaf. They followed the sound through the trees until they saw him, a man standing beside a cart, bundled in layers of scavenged uniforms and mismatched gloves. His accordion looked like it had survived its own war. He played slowly, his fingers stiff from the cold. But the melody carried something human in it, something almost defiant. When he saw them approach, he stopped playing and smiled, revealing the kind of face that had seen too much, but still thought life was a bit of a joke. "Morning," he said in a raspy voice. "You gentlemen lost?" "Only geographically," Ernst replied, "and spiritually." The man laughed, a dry, papery sound. "Then you're in good company." His name was Otto. He had been a musician before the war, or so he claimed. He didn't say what happened in between, and no one asked. In his cart, beneath a torn blanket, he carried scraps of civilization, a cracked mirror, a tin cup, a broken clock, and an unopened jar of pickles. "Pickles?" Ernst asked. Otto nodded solemnly. "Emergency morale." The men gathered around the cart, drawn to the accordion as if it were a campfire that made sound instead of heat. Otto played a few notes, then shrugged. "She's out of tune. But then again, so is the world." Ernst grinned. "You should write that down." "I did once," Otto said. "Then someone used the paper to light a fire." They laughed. "And it felt good. Real." For a brief moment, the frost, hunger, and distance didn't matter. Otto played another song, something slow and wistful. The melody wandered through the trees like a memory, half forgotten but unwilling to die. Ernst closed his eyes. He could almost imagine it. The warm glow of a cafe, a woman in a red dress, the sound of rain on cobblestones. The world before everything became gray and marching boots. When the song ended, no one spoke for a while. The silence after music always felt heavier, like the world remembering it had nothing better to offer. Otto finally said, "You're heading west." "Trying to," Ernst replied, "though our compass has opinions." "West is good," Otto said. "That's where the rumors say the roads still exist." "Rumors?" "Sure. The only thing still traveling faster than us." He offered them each a sip from his canteen, water that tasted faintly of rust and faith, then packed up his cart. "I'll walk with you a bit," he said. "I play better with an audience." "We're not paying," Ernst said. "Good," Otto smiled. "I'm not worth much." They set off together, a mismatched procession of ghosts, boots crunching, accordion sighing. At sunset, Otto played again, something jaunty this time. The soldiers marched in rhythm, half a step lighter than before. For once, the horizon didn't look so far away. When they made camp, Otto shared a single pickle with the group. It was sour, cold, and glorious. "To surviving another day," he said, raising the jar like a toast. Ernst clinked his tin cup against it. "And to the music that keeps pretending we will." That night, they slept with the faint sound of the accordion echoing in their dreams. A lullaby for men who'd forgotten what hope sounded like. By the second day with Otto, the air began to smell faintly of thaw. Not spring, nothing that hopeful, but a soft change, the kind that hinted the snow might one day turn back into mud. They followed a narrow track downhill until they heard water, thin and hesitant. A river, the first sound of something moving since, well, since anyone could remember. Ernst walked ahead, his boots slipping on the ice-crusted slope. He stopped when he saw it, the river bending through a white valley, and on its far bank, a house. At first, he thought it was a mirage. The chimney smoked, thin but steady, and the shutters were painted blue. Real paint. It looked alive. Someone's home, he murmured. Otto shaded his eyes. Or something is. The others caught up, their breath steaming, their eyes wide with suspicion. Nothing good ever looked that peaceful anymore. But the thought of warmth pulled harder than caution. They crossed the river, where it narrowed to a shallow ford. The ice cracked underfoot, whispering its disapproval, but held. The front door stood slightly ajar. Ernst raised a hand, hesitated, then knocked anyway. A small gesture of respect for a world that had forgotten manners. No answer. Inside, the air was warm, real hearth breath warmth that felt almost holy. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, logs popping. On the table sat a loaf of bread, fresh, impossibly fresh, and a pot of something that smelled of onions and sanity. God, whispered one of the men. We died, didn't we? Otto walked to the window, peered out, then shrugged. If this is heaven, it's very modest. The room was spotless, boots lined by the door, a coat draped neatly over a chair. No dust, no noise but the gentle simmer of the stew. Ernst approached the table. The bread was still warm to the touch. He stared at it a long time, half expecting it to vanish, like a trick of the cold. Anyone home? He called softly. Silence answered. They waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Not even a bird outside. Finally, hunger won over mystery. They ate slowly at first, then shamelessly, laughing between bites, thanking the invisible host for their generosity. Otto spooned out the last of the stew, sighed contentedly, and said, If the devil shows up, I'll apologize with a full stomach. After eating, they explored the house. There were 2 small bedrooms upstairs, a sewing kit on a windowsill, and a mirror that hadn't cracked. A rare luxury. Ernst looked into it, startled for a moment by the stranger staring back. He didn't look like a soldier anymore, just a man halfway between nowhere and home. That night, they slept indoors for the first time in weeks. The warmth was so complete, it almost made them nervous. Ernst lay on a soft mattress, staring at the ceiling beams. The quiet was too perfect, the fire too steady. At some hour past midnight, he woke to the sound of the door creaking. He sat up. Nothing moved downstairs, only the firelight flickering against the walls. He thought he heard footsteps outside, slow, crunching on snow. But when he looked out the window, there was no one. In the morning, everything looked the same, as if the night had never happened. The fire still burned. The bread had returned to the table. Another fresh loaf. Otto just stared. Well, he said finally, either we've found the kindest ghost in Europe, or a baker with impeccable timing. No one argued. They ate again, quietly, reverently. When they left, Ernst placed one of his bullets on the table. A small offering, payment, or apology. Outside, the air smelled faintly of river and smoke. Otto played a soft tune as they walked away, and the house behind them stood still. Blue shutters bright against the white. No footsteps followed, no door closed. Just the sound of water and the feeling that they had borrowed a night from something merciful. The day began like every other, gray, quiet, and full of snow. Ernst trudged along the road, boots crunching, thoughts drifting. West. They were supposed to be heading west. But the land seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the horizon had decided it didn't need to exist anymore. He glanced at Otto, walking beside him, accordion tucked under one arm. The man hummed softly. a tune that refused to follow any particular key. It didn't matter. It was music, and that was enough. The men around them shuffled in rhythm, bodies leaning forward against the wind, faces pale, eyes heavy. Some had stopped counting days. Others had stopped noticing the hours. Ernst had stopped caring about both. The road, if it could still be called that, was a ribbon of ice cutting through a sea of white. Occasionally, the ice cracked, sending a shiver up the spine. But it was always brief, and the world always returned to its hushed monotone. At one point, Ernst stumbled over something hidden beneath the snow, a broken sign, long erased by frost. He bent down, brushing off the ice. The letters were barely legible. Willkommen. Welcome. He laughed quietly to himself. Yes, welcome. To where, exactly? The others glanced at him. Don't ask questions, Otto whispered. The road doesn't like questions. Hours passed like this, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to have melted along with the snow, leaving only the crunch of boots, the sigh of wind, and the faint, occasional notes of the accordion. They passed abandoned vehicles, trucks frozen mid-turn, bicycles turned into sculptures by frost, and a single bicycle horn that let out a sad squeak when someone nudged it. Ernst couldn't stop himself from smiling. Even in the cold and chaos, life had a sense of humor. By afternoon, hunger returned, gnawing insistently. They had almost nothing left. A half slice of bread, some icicles melted into water, a tin can that might have contained peas, or perhaps despair. Ernst tried to joke. At least we're eating local cuisine. Snow stew with a garnish of frost. Some laughed, some groaned, some didn't respond. Humor was an optional accessory these days. The wind picked up, whistling through the skeletal trees along the road. Snow swirled like miniature tornadoes, and Ernst had the odd sensation that the land itself was moving beneath their feet. He shook his head, probably just tired. They reached a small ridge by evening, looking down at a valley shrouded in mist. The landscape below seemed endless. More roads, more snow, more questions about whether home was anywhere at all. Ernst stopped for a moment, staring at the gray expanse. Otto leaned beside him. You know, he said softly, this is the kind of place poets write about before they get frostbite, or lose all sense of humor. Ernst replied. Exactly, Otto said. Poetry and frostbite, both unavoidable. They moved on, descending into the valley. The road twisted, bent, and disappeared at intervals. Sometimes they walked in silence. Other times, one of the men hummed a tune that was half song, half prayer. Night came quickly, and they made camp beside a hollow tree, their fire small, smoky, but comforting enough. Ernst lay down, boots off, staring at the sky, where stars tried to pierce the gray ceiling of clouds. He whispered to himself, if this road has an end, I hope it has chairs, warmth, and coffee. Otto snorted. And pickles, he added, as if the universe needed reminding. The men drifted to sleep, bodies aching, hearts quietly grateful for rest. Ernst stayed awake a little longer, thinking about the endless road, a road that had taken everything and given almost nothing in return. But in the quiet, he realized something. It had also given them stories, small moments of absurdity, and the faint, stubborn hope that one day west would be more than just a direction. He closed his eyes, letting the snow, wind, and distant echoes of music lull him into dreams. And the road stretched on, quietly, patiently, waiting for the sun, or perhaps for the next day. to begin again. Morning arrived with the usual gray light, brushing the snow in a colorless glow. Ernst Müller and his group had walked further than yesterday, or maybe it only felt that way. Time had become elastic, stretching in all directions and refusing to obey any clock. They approached a river that had been marked on an old map, though maps these days were mostly decoration, and the rivers seemed to have their own ideas. The water was partially frozen, ice slick and uneven, like a patchwork quilt stitched by a careless giant. Across it stretched a bridge, fragile and broken in places. Planks were missing, warped and slick with frost. The river below gurgled, impatient, as if daring them to try. Ah, Ernst muttered, staring at the gaps. A footbridge to despair. Otto looked at him. It also doubles as an excellent practice in balance and humility. They tested the first plank carefully. It creaked ominously. Ernst held his breath. His legs were tired, his hands stiff, and his patience stretched thinner than the ice below. The others followed one by one, grumbling, swearing softly under their breath, and occasionally letting out nervous chuckles. It was the kind of humor born only when survival is optional, but highly encouraged. Halfway across, a plank groaned and shifted under Ernst's weight. He froze mid-step. The river below glimmered black and cold, whispering something about gravity and poor life choices. Excellent, he muttered, gripping the rope railing like a man holding on to his last shred of dignity. Just another Tuesday. Otto went next, balancing the accordion under one arm, muttering, "This thing is heavier than my conscience." A small laugh escaped the group. The music, even in silence, seemed to lighten the air. The wind tugged at them, as if testing their resolve. Snowflakes danced like tiny acrobats, distracting, playful, and oddly comforting. Ernst shook his head. Even the weather's mocking us now. They reached the middle, where a plank had almost completely given up. Ernst paused, considered turning back, then remembered the stories of men who had been too cautious and never reached anywhere. Forward, he whispered. One careful step, then another, each one a negotiation with ice and gravity. Finally, one by one, they reached the far side. There were shouts of relief, laughter that came from the same corner of the soul that hadn't forgotten how to breathe, and a collective exhale that seemed to lift some weight off the world. Ernst stood there for a moment, looking back at the bridge. It creaked, groaned, and sagged under its own despair, but held, just barely, like a friend who hadn't forgotten you, even if it had every reason to. Next time, he said, we bring a boat. No, Otto replied. Next time we bring courage, and maybe a good story about how we didn't die. The men laughed again, quietly, their voices carrying over the frozen river. Ernst felt a rare lightness, a reminder that even in the endless gray of retreat, moments of absurd triumph still existed. They continued along the bank, the river at their side, ice breaking here and there, whispering secrets only the snow could understand. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time, heavy with fatigue, light with the subtle joy of survival. By evening, they found a small copse of trees. The fire they made was small, but enough to warm bodies stiff with cold and hearts stiff with memory. Ernst lay back against a log, staring up through bare branches at the gray sky, thinking about the bridge. He whispered to himself, "We didn't fall. That's a victory." The others dozed off one by one, the faint echo of laughter and the occasional groan blending with the crackle of fire. Ernst closed his eyes, letting the river's murmur and the wind's gentle tug lull him towards sleep. Tomorrow, he thought, whatever lies ahead, they'll cross another bridge, frozen, broken, or imaginary, and they'll laugh again, because that was the only way to keep moving. The morning was colder than usual, the kind of cold that isn't sharp, but persistent, the kind that seeps into bones, thoughts, and memory alike. Ernst Müller trudged along, boots heavy with snow, breath curling into small clouds that vanished instantly. Otto walked beside him, accordion under his arm, humming softly. The tune wavered in the frozen air, half song, half exhalation. Even the wind seemed to pause, listening. They stumbled upon a village that had been buried under snow for weeks or months. No one could tell. Roofs sagged beneath the weight. Chimneys were half covered, and the streets were narrow tunnels of white. It looked like someone had pressed pause on life and then forgotten to hit play again. Ghost town, someone muttered. More like a snow globe, Otto said, squinting. Shaky, fragile, and probably cursed if you shake it too hard. Ernst laughed softly. Humor was a rare warmth these days. It's like the world forgot to clean up, he replied. They moved cautiously through the main street, the snow muffling their steps. Doors were frozen shut, windows coated in ice crystals. A child's sled leaned against a fence, dusted in snow, waiting for a rider who would never come. The village smelled of nothing, cold and faintly of wood smoke that had long since vanished. It felt surreal, like walking through a dream where someone had misplaced the ending. They came to a square where the statue of some long-forgotten mayor poked through the snow like a sentinel. Ernst shook his head. At least someone remembered to stand watch. They explored the houses that had doors ajar or broken shutters. Inside, everything was frozen in mid-use. A chair tipped over, a teacup on a table, a scarf left hanging on a hook. The quiet was overwhelming, almost polite, like the village itself was apologizing for existing in their path. Otto found a piano. The keys were stiff with ice, but when he pressed one, it let out a hollow, metallic twang. Ah, he said, music is optional here too. Ernst smiled, brushing snow from the windowsill. Even silence has character. They made camp in the largest house, a small inn with a collapsed roof and a fireplace that miraculously held a few logs. They managed to coax a weak flame from it, enough to warm hands and lift spirits slightly. Dinner was a quiet affair, a single loaf of bread shared among the men, with Otto pretending the crumbs were caviar. Ernst almost believed him. Almost. As they sat by the fire, Ernst looked out a broken window at the snowed-in village. He thought about the people who had lived here, their routines, their worries, their laughter, all frozen now like delicate glass ornaments. He whispered, half to himself, half to the village, "We'll keep walking. But thank you for letting us borrow this moment." Otto hummed again, softly, a lullaby without words, a reminder that even in abandoned places, life, or something like it, could still be found. Night fell, silent and deep. The snow outside pressed against the windows like a gentle tide, and Ernst lay on a cot, letting exhaustion wash over him. Tomorrow, he knew, they would walk again. The road would stretch endlessly, cold and indifferent. But for now, there was warmth, bread, and music. And for a fleeting moment, the snowed-in village felt like home. They left the snowed-in village in the morning, carrying only what they could manage: a few rations, a tin of water, Otto's accordion, and the fragile remnants of their courage. The road led them into a forest, or perhaps the forest had led them. Trees rose like frozen sentinels, tall and skeletal, their branches tangled into shapes that seemed to whisper secrets. The snow muffled their footsteps, making each step feel heavier and more deliberate. Ernst Müller, trudging in the middle of the group, looked around and muttered, "This forest, it has a sense of humor, and it's not very polite." Otto, striding beside him, agreed. Yes, it stretches and stretches. It is the kind of forest that knows you were tired and wants to test your patience. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no anchor here. The sun never rose properly, just a dim glow that barely touched the ground, like a candle burning through fog. Shadows leaned in strange directions, and the men occasionally glimpsed shapes in the snow that weren't there when they looked back. One soldier whispered that he saw a deer. Ernst squinted, convinced it was a hallucination. Otto said it was probably just the forest laughing at them. They pressed on. The snow deepened, filling footprints before the next man could step. Paths they thought they recognized disappeared as if erased overnight. Maps were useless. Compass needles trembled. Ernst stopped by a frozen stream, staring at his reflection, or at what the snow allowed him to see. His face looked smaller, paler, thinner. He touched it, as if to confirm he was still there. "You're still here," Otto said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Though I wouldn't blame you if you weren't." "I feel like I'm fading," Ernst admitted. "Or maybe the forest is just patient." They built a small fire near the stream. The smoke spiraled into the gray sky, almost invisible, almost irrelevant. They huddled, sharing stale bread and water that tasted of iron and winter. "It's a perfect place to disappear," one man said. "Perfectly quiet, perfectly cold," Ernst added, "and perfectly terrifying if you think too much." They laughed quietly. Laughter had become a survival skill, a small rebellion against the monotony of white. Otto hummed a little tune, tapping on the accordion case, and Ernst felt the faintest warmth in his chest, a reminder that humans could still endure absurdity. Hours later, the forest seemed endless. They walked past familiar-looking trees that turned out to be strangers, over frozen roots that seemed to twist just to trip them, and past footprints in the snow that belonged to someone else, or no one at all. Ernst began speaking to the forest quietly, as if it were an old friend. "West," he said. "Remember that? The direction we agreed upon?" The forest whispered back, only with the sighing of snow against branches. Night fell, deep and complete. They made camp beneath a stand of pine, small branches above like a fragile roof. Ernst lay down, staring at the dim sky, filtering through needles. The men around him slept fitfully, occasionally muttering about home, food, or ghosts. Ernst whispered to himself, "One day this forest will end, and when it does, I hope it's friendly." Otto tapped the accordion case gently. "If it's not, we'll play a song, and hope it understands music better than manners." The wind shifted, rustling the trees, and Ernst felt a strange comfort. The forest might be endless, the road uncertain, and tomorrow might be just as difficult as today. But they were alive, and in this quiet, frozen world, that was enough. And with that thought, he let himself drift into a sleep where snow whispered, shadows danced, and a faint accordion hummed the lullaby of survival. They emerged from the endless forest just as the pale sun dipped toward the horizon. its light stretching lazily over the snow. Ernst Müller squinted ahead. There, tucked between two gentle hills, lay a village, or at least something that resembled a village. It had no sign, no markings, and no smoke rising from chimneys. Houses sat in neat rows, frozen in an eerie calm, as if someone had paused life and forgotten to press play again. The streets were wide and covered in powdery snow, untouched by boot or paw. Ernst stopped, hesitant. Well, he said softly, this is new. Otto, accordion under his arm, peered over a fence. It's like the world pressed Ctrl plus Z and left it half finished. The men approached cautiously. Every step into the village was a negotiation with the silence. Windows reflected gray skies, the glass unbroken, but staring back like eyes that had seen too much. They explored slowly. Houses were empty, but not in the usual war-abandoned way. No furniture was overturned. No doors were ajar. It was as though everyone had simply vanished, leaving cups on tables, a broom leaning against the wall, a single shoe beside a doorway. Ernst touched the shoe, a child's size. He stared at it a long moment before standing, unsettled. We're not supposed to be here, he whispered. Neither are any of us, technically, Otto replied. But apparently, the universe disagrees with our schedules. They gathered in the village square, where a fountain had frozen solid, water locked in crystal perfection. Ernst knelt, tapping it lightly with his boot. The ice sang faintly, a metallic note that echoed across empty streets. One soldier muttered, feels like a set for a play no one's acting in. Exactly, Ernst said. We're the understudies, and the playwright is on vacation. They spent the night in a small inn at the edge of the village. Fires coaxed from dry wood miraculously found behind the counter. Bread was shared, water rationed, and Otto hummed quietly, testing keys on his accordion. The sound floated through the rooms, a fragile counterpoint to the stillness outside. Ernst looked out a frost-covered window. The village lay silent, blanketed in snow, and yet it was alive, or perhaps just aware. Each frozen roof, each icicle, hanging from the gutters, seemed to lean slightly toward them, observing without judgment. He whispered to himself, we're guests here, even if no one's home. Sleep came slowly. Dreams were strange. Windows opened into fields of endless snow. Streets wound into impossible loops, and shadows moved just out of sight. The village was a labyrinth, a world paused, but not broken, a place where the familiar laws of time had taken a holiday. Otto's accordion notes lingered in the dreams, a gentle reassurance that even in places abandoned by humans, music could carry you. When morning came, they packed quietly and left the village with no name behind them, no footprints, no disturbance, as if they had never been there at all. Ernst looked back once before moving on. The streets sparkled, frozen in their quiet perfection. He smiled faintly. Somewhere between memory and imagination, there's a place like this, and for a night we were allowed to visit. Otto plucked at his accordion, softly, a lullaby for the lost, the wandering, and the still curious souls moving westward through snow, forests, and endless uncertainty. The forest finally opened to a narrow valley, and there it was, a river that glimmered like polished glass. Ernst Müller stopped, squinting at the water. It wasn't just frozen, not entirely. Parts of it reflected the gray sky perfectly, while other sections rippled gently, as if the river itself were breathing. Otto walked beside him, accordion resting lightly against his chest. I think the river is mocking us, he said. It shows us ourselves, but prettier than we deserve. Ernst glanced down. The reflection staring back was pale and tired, eyes rimmed with frost and exhaustion. He squinted at the river again, hoping it might lie. The men approached cautiously. The ice along the edges seemed solid, but untrustworthy, and the water beneath gleamed like a dark promise. Some of the soldiers threw small stones to test the ice. Each splash echoed like tiny applause from the universe, or warning. Ernst wasn't sure which. They decided to cross at a narrow bend where a few natural stones poked above the water. Step by careful step, they balanced, slipping once or twice, laughing softly at their own awkwardness. The river reflected not just the sky, but faint glimpses of memory: a woman's face, a childhood dog, a mother's kitchen. Ernst blinked, and the images dissolved into the gray ripples. You see that? One soldier whispered. Ernst shrugged. No idea, but it's either hallucination or the river knows too much. Otto hummed softly, coaxing a tune that almost matched the river's rhythm. The men followed his lead, each step in time with the faint music, each heartbeat reminding them that they were still alive, precariously, but still. Halfway across, the ice cracked with a low groan. Ernst froze. Below, water shifted, dark and patient. Excellent, he muttered. A river with an attitude. I approve. They edged carefully, one foot after another, until finally, all of them reached the far bank. There was relief, small applause, and the quiet acknowledgement that they had cheated gravity, cold, and maybe fate itself. Ernst knelt to touch the water, now calm. His reflection stared back, pale but determined. He wondered if the river had shown him something real, or just what he wanted to see. Otto, always the philosopher in disguise, said, Rivers like this are dangerous, not because they'll drown you, but because they remind you of yourself. They made camp beside the river, the fire small, huddled close. Snow began to fall again, gentle this time, almost ceremonial. Ernst stared into the flickering flames, thinking about reflection, memory, and the odd humor in surviving another day. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, he whispered to Otto, who shrugged, fingers tapping absently on the accordion. Probably more snow, more cold, and maybe another miracle, Otto said. Or a disaster. Life likes to alternate. Ernst smiled faintly, letting the warmth of the fire and the rhythm of the river's reflection lull him into a slow, deep sleep. The river whispered under the ice, carrying dreams, reflections, and quiet stories of those who walked its banks, reminding the weary travelers that even in frozen places, the world could still mirror their resilience and their absurdity. The morning was gray, the kind of gray that presses gently on your eyes and refuses to leave. Ernst Müller and his group trudged along a frozen track, the steel rails glinting faintly beneath a thin crust of snow. Otto walked beside him, accordion tucked under one arm, humming a tune that seemed to mimic the rhythm of the tracks. The forest had finally thinned, leaving them exposed to the sky, pale, flat, and unyielding. Then they saw it, a train, or at least what remained of one. Carriages lay derailed, twisted into angles that made Ernst's stomach queasy. The engine sat on its side like a tired beast that had finally collapsed. Smoke, long since spent, curled faintly from the chimney in thin, ghostly strands. One soldier whispered, It looks alive, or just very angry. Ernst replied softly. Either way, I wouldn't try to ride it. They approached cautiously. Each carriage was a frozen testament to chaos. Broken windows, splintered wood, gears stiff with ice. Inside, seats were upturned, belongings scattered, and a single scarf hung limply from a hook. It danced lightly in the wind, a spectral greeting. Otto leaned against a carriage. You know, he said, railroads are like life. You think you're on a set path, and then, boom, derailment. Ernst smiled faintly, poetic, in a tragic sort of way. They explored briefly. The train, despite its ruin, seemed to hold stories. A pair of gloves left on a seat, a journal with pages half frozen, and the faint echo of laughter that probably belonged to someone long gone. Ernst picked up the journal, leafing through it carefully. The handwriting was neat, almost serene, detailing mundane tasks. A life paused. Even in disaster, he murmured, someone still kept notes. Hope, Otto said, or stubbornness. Hard to tell the difference. Outside, the wind swirled around the twisted metal, whistling through gaps like a choir of small ghosts. The men shivered, but laughed softly, partly from cold, partly from relief that no one was actually haunting them. At midday, they made a small fire beside the tracks, careful not to let it touch the rails. Ernst watched the smoke rise, imagining it as a signal to some invisible observer. We survived the forest, the river, and now, the train. The rest of the day passed quietly. The group scavenged small pieces of wood and cloth. Nothing of real value, but enough to fuel small jokes and quiet camaraderie. Otto hummed intermittently, tapping the accordion case with a rhythm that made the ruins feel less like danger and more like theater. As evening approached, Ernst stood atop a small embankment, staring at the train. The metal reflected the muted sky, twisted and beautiful in its decay. He thought about journeys interrupted, paths changed, and the absurdity of continuing forward when the world seemed so determined to derail you. He whispered to himself, we keep moving, one foot, one laugh, one step past the tracks at a time. The men settled beside the fire, letting the quiet hum of the accordion and the wind's soft whistle lull them toward sleep. Ernst closed his eyes, imagining the train slowly resuming its journey, not on tracks, but through memory, snow, and the stories of those who walked beside it, ghostly, human, and stubbornly alive. The next morning dawned pale and hesitant, a thin light filtering through a sky that seemed unsure of itself. Ernst Müller trudged forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots, Otto humming softly beside him. The men followed, their shoulders hunched, scarves wrapped tightly, eyes tired but alert. In the distance, Ernst saw the hill, gentle at first, then rising more sharply, crowned with movement. As they approached, he realized it wasn't wind twisting the snow. No, it was flags. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of flags, tattered and frozen, each one flapping feebly in the cold breeze. Ah, Otto said quietly, the hill of forgotten flags. Or at least, I'll call it that. Forgotten by whom? Ernst asked, squinting at the frozen mess of colors. By time, Otto replied. By the wind, and by anyone who thought they mattered. They climbed slowly, each step a negotiation with frost and fatigue. Flags snapped and groaned in the wind. Their colors faded to whispers of red, white, and black. Some hung limply from rusted poles. Others had shredded into streamers that trailed like spectral banners behind them. At the top, Ernst stopped, staring. Each flag told a story, if one were foolish enough to read it. Battles fought, hopes dashed, promises whispered into the snow. He thought of the men he had seen, the places they had passed, and how little anyone seemed to remember after a day or a night. Otto stood beside him, accordion in hand. Notice how even in decay they insist on waving, he said. Stubborn little things, like soldiers. Ernst smiled faintly. Yes, like soldiers. The wind tugged at them, cold and insistent, yet the hill felt strangely sacred. The men huddled together briefly, sharing a quiet laugh. One soldier muttered, at least someone's still doing their job. Even if that someone is dead, Ernst added. They explored the hilltop slowly. Some flags were still attached to plaques or small signs, bearing names long faded by frost. Ernst traced a hand over one, almost afraid to disturb it. The cold metal prongs of the pole bit lightly into his gloves. Otto tapped a rhythm on his accordion case. I think it's polite to play for the flags, he said. They've been standing up for years without anyone listening. Ernst chuckled, allowing himself a small moment of absurdity. Music for flags. It was silly, but perhaps necessary. As they prepared to descend, a gust of wind tore through the hill, sending the tattered banners snapping violently. A few poles creaked dangerously, as if ready to surrender. Ernst held onto his hat, and for a brief moment he imagined the entire hill tipping forward, carrying them with it, flags, soldiers, and all. Good thing we don't float, he muttered. Or perhaps, Otto replied, the hill is teaching us humility. They walked down carefully, the snow soft underfoot, the flag-strewn hill looming behind them like a reminder. It was strange, surreal, and quietly funny all at once. A place where memory, insignia, and absurdity collided. By evening, the men made camp at the base of the hill. The wind had eased, the snow softened, and the fire they built crackled with warmth. Ernst stared at the remaining flags in the distance, their colors now muted shadows against the gray sky. He whispered to himself, they're still waving, even when no one watches, even when the world forgets. Maybe that's the point. Otto hummed softly, a lullaby for flags, soldiers, and men still walking westward, stubborn, tired, and quietly alive. The next day, the snow fell lighter, almost politely, dusting the world in quiet white. Ernst Müller trudged along, boots leaving shallow prints in the soft crust. Otto walked beside him, accordion tucked under one arm, softly tapping out a rhythm that somehow kept pace with their steps. As they rounded a gentle hill, a faint glow appeared in the distance. At first, Ernst thought it was the sun, filtered through stubborn clouds, but the light flickered, unsteady, small, and impossibly warm. Do you see that? Ernst whispered. Otto squinted. Yes, either someone left a fire, or the universe decided to send a greeting card. They approached cautiously. The glow resolved itself into a single lantern, flickering on a snow-covered post beside what appeared to be a path, or at least the suggestion of one. No house, no smoke, no other sign of life, just the lantern, bravely glowing against the gray and white. Ernst felt a strange mix of relief and suspicion. A light in the snow was either a friend or a trap, or, if the universe was particularly whimsical, both at once, one step at a time, Otto muttered, or two, if you're feeling lucky. The men moved closer, noticing the post was old, worn, and leaning slightly to one side. The lantern swayed with the wind, casting shadows that danced across the snow. Ernst imagined tiny figures moving just out of the corner of his eye. Perhaps ghosts, perhaps snow, perhaps imagination, which had become their closest companion. Do you think anyone's here? One soldier asked. Otto shrugged. Either someone's thoughtful, or the lantern just likes attention. I vote for the latter. They followed the faint path the lantern suggested, stepping carefully over snowdrifts and frozen puddles. The light flickered as if guiding them, winking playfully, coaxing them onward. After a while, Ernst realized the lantern's glow wasn't just light, it was comfort, a tiny beacon in a vast, indifferent world. Even without knowing who had placed it or why, it reminded him that the world could still hold small acts of care, or at least small acts of whimsy. They stopped to rest, gathering around the lantern. Otto placed his accordion case beside it, tapping a soft rhythm on the metal. Ernst leaned against a snowbank, closing his eyes briefly. The wind whispered through the trees. The lantern swayed, and the snow fell silently, as if time had paused to observe them. This, Ernst said softly, is why we keep walking, even when it's cold, endless, and absurd. Even when the road hates us, lights like this, they're why we continue. They huddled closer, sharing the faint warmth of the lantern's glow and the fragile comfort of presence. Each man was tired, frozen, and absurdly alive. Night fell completely, the snow now heavier but quieter, and Ernst lay back, staring at the soft light. Otto hummed, softly, almost as if the lantern itself requested a lullaby. For the first time in days, Ernst let himself believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a reason for walking, for enduring, and for continuing onward, one flickering lantern at a time. The snow fell heavier that morning, blanketing the world in soft white. Ernst Müller and his group trudged along a narrow path, boots crunching rhythmically, breath misting in the cold air. Otto walked beside him, fingers tapping gently on the accordion case, a quiet rhythm that kept them moving forward. Then, through the snow and haze, Ernst spotted it, a cabin, small, sturdy, and surprisingly cheerful against the gray backdrop. What caught his eye immediately was the door, painted a vivid, unapologetic red. Red, Ernst whispered. In a world of gray and white, red seems optimistic. Otto squinted, or defiant, possibly angry. Either way, it's noticeable. They approached cautiously. The snow was soft but deep, muffling their steps. The cabin looked lived in, though it had no smoke from the chimney. Windows were frosted over, but light seemed to pulse faintly from within, like a heartbeat. Ernst reached for the doorknob. Cold metal met glowed hand. He paused. What do you think? Trap or sanctuary? Otto tilted his head. I'd vote sanctuary, with a dash of mystery. Keeps things exciting. The door creaked open under Ernst's push. Inside, warmth hit them immediately. Not overwhelming, just enough to remind frozen bones that heat existed. A small fire burned in the hearth. Logs stacked neatly nearby, and the smell of pine filled the cabin. The men stepped inside carefully, taking in the room. A simple table held a loaf of bread, wrapped in cloth. Chairs were arranged with casual precision, as if someone had been interrupted mid-meal. A small rug warmed the floor, and a single lantern flickered softly in the corner. Otto hummed quietly, as though acknowledging the cabin's hospitality. Ernst couldn't help but smile. Finally, somewhere that hasn't tried to kill us yet. They settled down, boots off, stretching stiff limbs. Ernst poured water from a tin and warmed it. near the fire. The men ate quietly, savoring the bread, the warmth, and the odd feeling of safety in a world that had forgotten it. Who do you think lives here? One soldier asked. Ernst shrugged. Someone sensible, or someone very lucky, or maybe both. Otto tapped the accordion case. Or perhaps no one. Maybe the cabin exists solely to mock wandering soldiers with comfort. They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that rises softly after days of hardship. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weightless relief. After eating, Ernst explored the small cabin. A coat hung on a hook, a kettle sat neatly on the stove, and in the corner, a notebook lay open. Its pages were blank, waiting. He ran a finger over them, imagining the thoughts of the absent occupant. Maybe they were a writer, or maybe they just liked red doors. Night fell early, the snow outside quieting almost ceremoniously. Ernst lay on a simple cot, the warmth from the hearth washing over him. He glanced at the red door through the frosted window. It stood bold and vivid, a small rebellion against the endless gray outside. He whispered to himself, even in a world of snow and shadows, some things insist on color, on life, on a little absurdity. Otto hummed again, soft, steady, like a lullaby for soldiers, cabins, and all things stubbornly alive in the snow. Ernst closed his eyes, letting warmth, light, and the gentle hum of the accordion lull him into sleep. For once, the world outside could wait. The morning light arrived pale and fragile, barely brushing through the snow-laden trees. Ernst Müller and his group left the cabin with a quiet reluctance, boots sinking softly into the crusted snow. Otto walked beside him, fingers drumming a gentle rhythm on the accordion case. Ahead, the landscape shifted unexpectedly. Rows of trees appeared, bare but orderly, like silent sentinels guarding some forgotten secret. Ernst squinted. It was an orchard, or what remained of one, buried deep under ice and snow. Branches, heavy and silvered with frost, bent toward the ground, forming natural arches along the narrow paths between them. An orchard, Ernst murmured, in the middle of nowhere. How poetic. Otto tilted his head. Or very cruel. Fruitless trees, frozen in their prime. It's like nature's way of saying, I can still be dramatic. They entered the orchard carefully. Snow muffled their steps, turning each crunch into a muted echo. Icicles hung like chandeliers from twisted branches, glittering faintly in the dim light. Every step felt sacred, as if walking among ghosts of blossoms and seasons past. Some trees still held the memory of fruit, shriveled, icy remnants clinging stubbornly. Ernst reached up, brushing a frozen apple lightly. It shattered under his touch, a small cascade of frost and shattered dreams. He laughed quietly, a nervous sound, as Otto tapped a beat on his accordion case. Even the trees are joking now, Ernst said, and we're the punchline. Otto nodded. Survival comedy, best served cold. Hours passed as they moved through the orchard, the snow deepening, the branches whispering faintly in the wind. Shadow stretched, twisting with the angles of the trees, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Ernst imagined tiny faces in the bark, staring at them, amused, patient, and somehow alive. They stopped beside a particularly large tree, its trunk gnarled and hollowed by frost. Inside the cavity, Ernst noticed a small tin, old, dented, and sealed. Curious, he opened it carefully. Inside was a single seed, shriveled but intact. A survivor, Ernst whispered, even in ice, even in neglect. Otto smiled faintly. A metaphor, or a snack if desperate. They set up a small fire in a clearing, careful not to damage the fragile orchard. The flames flickered warmly, contrasting with the silvered trees, creating shadows that danced across the frozen branches. They shared a quiet meal, bread and scraps, letting the surreal beauty of the orchard ease their exhaustion. Ernst lay back on the snow, looking up at the skeletal canopy above. The sky was gray, but the orchard gave it shape, structure, a sense of quiet magic. He whispered to himself. Even in the coldest places, life insists on its existence. Even when buried, frozen, or forgotten, it persists. Otto hummed softly, a gentle rhythm that blended with the wind. Ernst closed his eyes, letting the orchard, the snow, and the faint music lull him into sleep. And for a moment, he dreamed of spring, fragile blossoms, sunlight on frosted leaves, and a world that could still surprise, amuse, and endure, even when all seemed frozen in place. The forest thinned again, revealing a narrow ravine carved by time and water, though the water itself was hidden beneath ice and shadow. Ernst Müller approached cautiously, boots crunching over snow-dusted rocks. Ahead stretched a bridge, fragile, narrow, and creaking under its own existence. Ah, Ernst muttered, squinting at the structure. A bridge. How reassuringly precarious. Otto followed, accordion under his arm, tapping lightly on the metal. And here I thought bridges were supposed to make life easier. Apparently, this one is sarcastic. The bridge was simple, wooden planks, some split or missing, strung between ropes stiffened by frost. Each step sent a groan echoing into the ravine below. Ernst paused, looking down. The ice beneath was black and patient, like a mirror for regret and bad decisions. Step lightly, he whispered, and keep your imagination in check. Too late, Otto said softly. Mine's already panicking. One by one, the men began to cross, each step measured, cautious, and slightly absurd. The bridge swayed gently with their weight, teasing them, testing balance and patience alike. Ernst found himself humming, under his breath, a soft rhythm to keep fear at bay. Halfway across, a plank cracked loudly. Ernst froze mid-step, gripping the rope railing like a man holding on to his last shred of dignity. Below, the wind whistled through the ravine, carrying echoes of old laughter, old fears, and the faint memory of the snowed-in village behind them. Excellent, he muttered. The bridge has a sense of humor, or malice, possibly both. Otto chuckled nervously, tapping his accordion case for rhythm. I vote for humor with a hint of menace. They continued, step by careful step. Each plank groaned, each rope protested, but slowly, inch by inch, they made it across. Ernst paused on the far side, exhaling deeply. Behind them, the bridge swayed faintly, holding itself together like a tired old man who refuses to admit defeat. For a moment, they stood quietly, listening to the echoes of their passage. The wind, the ice, the distant forest, all carried the sound, twisting and reflecting it back in strange, haunting ways. Ernst smiled faintly. Even in danger, the world can be poetic. Or dramatic, Otto added. Dramatic is cheaper than therapy. They made camp on the far side, finding shelter beneath a cluster of trees. The fire was small, barely enough to chase off the chill, but enough to warm frozen hands and hearts. Ernst stared at the bridge in the distance, its silhouette sharp against the gray sky. He whispered to himself, one step at a time, one laugh, one plank, one echo. That's all it asks of us. Otto hummed a gentle lullaby, each note echoing faintly across the ravine. Ernst let the sound, the wind, and the quiet murmur of the snow-laden forest lull him into a deep, reflective sleep. And as he drifted, he thought of bridges, echoes, and all the improbable places that had carried him this far, fragile, absurd, and stubbornly alive. The morning fog hung low over the valley, softening the jagged outlines of distant hills. Ernst Müller and his group followed a narrow mountain path, each step crunching softly over frozen dirt and scattered stones. Otto walked beside him, fingers drumming lightly on the accordion case, a quiet rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the whispering wind. Through the mist, they saw it, a monastery, or at least what remained of one. Stone walls, weathered and moss covered, rose from the mountainside like the bones of some forgotten giant. The towers were fractured, their spires jagged against the gray sky, and windows gaped open like the eyes of a sleeping sentinel. Ah, Ernst murmured. Even in ruin, someone tried to reach heaven. Otto tilted his head, or at least the clouds, ambitious for a pile of rocks. They approached cautiously. The path narrowed, twisting past low walls and frozen streams. Snow clung stubbornly to every ledge, and each step echoed faintly in the empty mountains. Ernst couldn't help but feel the place had been waiting for them, patient, silent, observing their passage. Inside, the monastery was cold and hushed, yet alive in its own way. Long hallways stretched like corridors of memory. Stairs creaked underfoot, and faint drafts whispered secrets across stone floors. Ernst touched a wall, feeling the uneven texture, imagining the hands that had built this place centuries ago. A chapel opened before them, empty but for dust. A few tattered pews and a shattered altar. Sunlight filtered through broken stained glass, casting faint colors on the stone floor. Ernst squinted at the fragments, imagining the lives that had passed through here. Monks, visitors, soldiers, lost wanderers, and now only echoes remained. Quiet, one soldier whispered. Too quiet, perfectly quiet, Ernst replied, and slightly unnerving. But quiet. Otto tapped his accordion case softly, producing a single note that resonated across the stone, blending with the wind in a strange harmony. They explored slowly, finding small treasures of absurdity. A half-burned candle, a pair of boots neatly lined in a corner, a manuscript filled with unreadable scrawls. Ernst smiled faintly. Someone lived, worked, and thought here, and now it's waiting for us to pretend we understand. Night fell quickly, shadows stretching across the monastery walls. They made a small fire in the remains of the kitchen, careful not to disturb the fragile relics. Ernst stared at the flickering flames, thinking about the centuries of silence, the resilience of stone, and the absurdity of life continuing despite ruin. Otto hummed quietly, a gentle, floating lullaby for monks, soldiers, and men still wandering through snow, forest, and mountains. Ernst closed his eyes, letting warmth, light, and music carry him into sleep, comforted by the knowledge that even forgotten places held stories, humor, and quiet grace. They descended from the monastery, leaving stone and silence behind, and entered a valley where pine trees stretched endlessly, their needles heavy with snow. The forest seemed alive in a new way. Each branch whispered softly as the wind moved through, creating a chorus that was part song, part murmur, and part gentle admonishment. Ernst Müller slowed his pace, listening. The whispers were subtle, almost playful, as if the trees were commenting on their passage, teasing them with faint secrets. Otto, accordion tucked under his arm mimicked the rhythm of the wind with a light tap, blending man-made sound with nature's chorus. Do you hear that? Ernst asked quietly. The forest is gossiping, Otto replied, with a faint smile. Probably about us. We're not very dignified travelers, you know. The valley stretched in a gentle undulations, each hill and hollow carrying the whispers farther, bending them around bends and over snow-covered ridges. Footprints they left were quickly erased by falling snow, leaving only faint impressions that vanished almost immediately. They paused at a frozen brook, its waters barely visible beneath the ice. Ernst knelt, letting his gloved fingers skim the surface. The ice was smooth, reflecting the pines above like a muted mirror. He saw his own face, pale and tired, but strangely alive, and 1,000 whispers seemed to echo from the reflection itself. It's talking to us, a soldier murmured. Or mocking us, Ernst replied. Hard to tell. Either way, it's polite. They made camp in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The fire they built cast long shadows across the snow, blending with the whispered melodies of the trees. Ernst watched the flames flicker, their warmth seeping slowly into his cold fingers, and thought about the absurdity of being alive in such quiet beauty. Otto hummed softly, letting each note drift with the wind, and for a moment Ernst felt as if the valley itself was listening, approving, and perhaps even laughing quietly at their misadventures. Night came quickly. Snow fell gently, muffling every sound except for the whispers that never ceased. Ernst lay back against a mound of snow, eyes half closed, mind drifting between reality and dream. The valley's soft hum, the fire, and Otto's gentle rhythm combined into a lullaby unique to this frozen, whispering place. He whispered to himself, even when the road is long, the snow is deep, and the world is absurd, there are moments like this, moments that remind you life continues, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. And with that thought, Ernst let the valley, the whispers, and the snow carry him into a deep, reflective sleep, preparing for the final steps of their journey westward. Morning arrived pale and hesitant, brushing the valley of whispering pines with a fragile light. Ernst Müller and his group climbed steadily, leaving the forest behind, entering a wide plateau that stretched like a frozen sea under the gray sky. Snow lay thick and undisturbed, reflecting the dim morning light, and the air carried a hush that felt almost sacred. But the hush was deceptive. Ernst sensed it first, a subtle shift in the wind, a slight pause in the rhythm of snow falling. Then came the sound, distant, eerie, fragmented, the howls of wolves, not constant, not close, but scattered across the plateau like faint echoes. They're quiet, Otto whispered, accordion resting under his arm. Too quiet, suspiciously quiet. Exactly, Ernst said. They sound polite, and polite wolves are usually dangerous wolves. They pressed forward, boots crunching over crusted snow. Every step felt amplified, each movement mirrored in the vast emptiness. The plateau had no trees, no shelter, only the occasional jagged rock and the haunting stretches of frozen white. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the faint howls drifted across the wind, seemingly coming from every direction. Ernst paused on a ridge, scanning the horizon. The wolves remained distant, yet somehow present in every sound, every shadow, every subtle movement. They're watching us, he said softly. or critiquing our walking technique, Otto replied, tapping a rhythm on the accordion case. I always knew wolves had standards. They found a small hollow, a depression shielded slightly from the wind, and decided to make camp. The fire crackled faintly, struggling against the cold air, yet providing just enough warmth for frozen fingers and weary bones. Ernst watched the flames, the distant shadows, and thought about the absurdity of standing on a plateau surrounded by polite predators, snow, and silence. The wolves' howls came intermittently, a gentle reminder of nature's persistent presence. Ernst smiled faintly, imagining the animals discussing their own opinions about human wanderers. Perhaps they were amused, perhaps indifferent, or perhaps they were judging their boots. As night fell, the plateau took on a strange, serene quality. The snow softened, muffling every sound except the distant calls. Ernst lay back, boots tucked close, scarf wrapped tightly, and listened to the plateau breathe. Otto hummed softly, blending his gentle notes with the eerie howls, creating a lullaby of survival, absurdity, and quiet reflection. Ernst whispered to himself, even in vast, empty places, life watches, observes, and sometimes it humors us. And with that thought, surrounded by snow, shadows, and polite wolves, he let the plateau carry him into a deep, contemplative sleep. One step, one laugh, one echo at a time. The morning was soft, almost reluctant to arrive. Ernst Müller and his group climbed the last gentle slopes, snow crunching faintly beneath their boots, breath misting in pale air. The plateau behind them stretched into memory, the whispering pines, the frozen orchard, and the silent wolves fading into the distance. Ahead lay the final ridge, crowned by a horizon where the sky kissed the earth in soft shades of gold and rose. Ernst paused for a moment, letting the world speak in quiet tones, the wind, the distant mountains, the gentle whisper of snow settling. Look, Otto said softly, accordion tucked under one arm. The world is showing off. I approve. Ernst smiled faintly. Yes, and it's about time we let it. They climbed slowly, savoring each step. The journey had been long, strange, and filled with absurdities. Frozen villages, ghost trains, lanterns in the snow, and valleys whispering secrets. Each step toward this ridge was both an ending and a continuation, a meditation on survival, humor, and stubborn life. At the crest they stopped. The sun hung low, painting the sky in muted pastels, reflecting off the snow in gentle brilliance. Ernst felt the weight of the journey lift slightly, replaced with quiet awe. The world was still cold, still vast, still absurd, but beautiful in ways that only long travel and hardship could reveal. He turned to Otto, who tapped a soft rhythm on his accordion case, harmonizing with the whispering wind. Do you think we'll remember all this? Ernst asked. Maybe, Otto replied. Or maybe the memories are for the snow, the trees, and the ghosts. We just carry the warmth and the laughs. Ernst nodded. He thought of the lantern that guided them, the orchard frozen in its stubborn persistence, the monastery waiting quietly for explorers, and the plateau of wolves that had to judge them politely. Each memory carried a strange comfort, a lullaby for the weary and wandering. The sun dipped lower, softening the ridge in golden light. Shadows stretched across the snow, painting familiar patterns that reminded Ernst of all they had passed. He whispered to himself, every step mattered, Every absurdity, every small miracle, every laugh, it carried us here. Otto hummed one final, gentle tune, letting the sound drift across the ridge, blending with wind, snow, and fading light. Ernst closed his eyes, letting the warmth of friendship, reflection, and quiet humor seep into his bones. And as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in farewell shades, Ernst let himself rest. The world was vast, indifferent, and absurd. Yet here, on this final ridge, it felt quietly, stubbornly, alive. Sleep came easily, deep, and undisturbed, carrying the echoes of journeys past, the lessons of frozen landscapes, and the gentle humor that had kept them moving all along. And somewhere in the distance, the snow whispered, approvingly, softly, and endlessly,